Hi friends, it's Laura at Aquamarine18, and I'm just here with a maybe quick, but probably not, video about what I've been reading and an update on my progress on my book Stack of Shame. If you're not familiar with the book Stack of Shame, I'll link the video below where I explain that stack of books that I really want to get through this year, and contextualize that in my depth year goals a bit more in detail. So the last time I updated on my reading was February 9th, and at that time I had read 3 of the books out of my book Stack of Shame, plus a couple of other books, one that I had received for Christmas, one book for work, and one for the Literary Witches reading group that Becca and Kelly Bear have been doing. So this is the update for my reading since February 9th, so no repetition. I wasn't planning on this being my next video, and this is, not that planned or anything, but I realized that I've been reading so much lately that if I didn't do a book update video sooner rather than later, I would have so many books to mention that we might be here all day. So I thought that I would come on and make this video today because I have, since February 9th, my last update, finished a total of 9 more books. I've been at home a lot, of course, given the global circumstances right now. All of my work has been shifted to remote working from home, and I've been reading a lot. So 9 books in less than 2 months. So I thought that I would go through and share some of my reading materials with you. And the way that this breaks down is that I have finished 2 more books on the book Stack of Shame. I have also read 4 books for the online reading groups that I've been participating in, which are the Blossom Book Club hosted by Katie Flowers and the Literary Witches Book Club hosted by Kelly Bear and Becca. And I'll link videos introducing both of those book clubs below. I really enjoy the book club, so if you're interested in joining, that would be great. So I've read 4 books for that, 1 for Blossom Book Club and 3 for Literary Witches since last update. I've also read 2 books from my ebook folder of shame, which I have elected not to share in detail on this channel because it's embarrassing, friends. It's bad. So I read 2 more ebooks on my Kindle, which I'll talk about a little bit, but of course won't have to physically show you. And then finally, the last book I'm going to share with you is the book that broke the rules. So I had set the goal of reading all of the physical books, the 10 books on my book Stack of Shame, before I bought any more books, with some caveats for reading material required for my work or for the book clubs that I want to keep up with. And I broke the rules. I cheated on my depth year and bought a book. And I read it very quickly. So I'll finish with that one. I'm still sticking with my goal. I'm still working through the book Stack of Shame, but I have fallen off the depth year wagon with regards to books. It happens, and I feel okay with it. So, what have I been reading? I have read 2 books I mentioned from the book Stack of Shame so far since my last update. The first of those is Tarot for Troubled Times by Shaheen, Miro, and Theresa Reed. I finished this book. I read it cover to cover. I did some of the exercises as I went through. I think that there's a lot of really great exercises and ideas in here. There's a lot of really good journaling prompts in here, so if you're into tarot and journaling, this might be a book for you. I do have some mixed feelings about it and some criticisms, and I feel like I would like to make a more detailed book review of this book. Since this is a channel that is largely focused on tarot, I thought that might be something that people would be interested in. So I will discuss that book in more detail in another video. But I did finish it, so that's 1 from the Stack of Shame done. And I will actually just mention another tarot book. The only other tarot book on my stack was Queering the Tarot. by Cassandra Snow, and that one has actually been chosen as a Blossom Book Club book for an upcoming month, so I'm going to have another one read, which is fabulous. The other book from the book stack of shame that I read was the Tao Te Ching, and I had never read the Tao Te Ching before, and this one I knew is going to be more of an adaptation or retelling than a translation, because it is Ursula Le Guin. And for folks who don't know Ursula LeGuin, she is a incredible author of science fiction, fantasy, some young adult texts as well, short stories, poetry, literary criticism, super, super prolific author. She, here's a picture of her on the back. She lived from 1929 to 2018, and she won 6 Nebula Awards, 7 Hugo Awards, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Grand Master Award, and the National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. So incredible. In my teaching, I teach at university, I have taught her novel The Left Hand of Darkness a number of times. And I love The Left Hand of Darkness, and The Dispossessed as well as a novel by her that's one of my favorites. And her short stories I love as well. So I wanted to read this one because Taoist thinking is an influence that she cites for a lot of her fiction, actually. And it's not an area that I'm versed in at all. So I was very curious to read it. And I'm not going to pretend for a second that I, fully grasp the ideas in this book. It's one that I think that I'm going to be coming back to and returning to over and over. But it's beautiful. It's a beautifully written text. It's again the only Tao Te Ching I've read. There are so many translations and adaptations. I will say something that I really liked about this one is that she has a lot of detail on her choices of wording, because it is of course a translation, a lot on how she did that work, as someone who does not speak or read Chinese, so she's working from translations and adapting herself. But she's very much very clear about the different versions that she's looked at and why she made the kind of choices that she made in trying to really convey the kind of spirit of the text. So I enjoyed reading that. So that's 2 book stack of shame books. Next I read, next in the narrative of this video, not necessarily, this is not in order of my reading, but I also read 4 reading group books in the last couple of months since my last update. One was for Blossom Book Club with Katie Flowers, and that book was Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This was a book that was kind of on my radar and on my books I want to read someday long list. It's a fucking infinite list, if I'm honest. That it was on my list for a very, very long time, and I was always kind of compelled by it and interested in it. So when it was chosen, and we vote on the books, but we're allowed to vote for more than one. We vote on the books each month, and it was one of the ones that I had voted for, and I was really glad that it got chosen. And I will say that this was my favorite Blossom Book Club book that we read so far. I definitely found some ideas in here that I really connected with. I did quite a bit of note-taking in this book. I do, I only use pencil, but I do put some brackets and underlines in this book. And I think that I learned quite a lot about plants and their interconnections and their relationships with each other and with people, historically and contemporarily, and with other creatures. And it was a really interesting book. And it also has a strong, autobiographical element to this book. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is a professor of environmental biology She's a botanist and an academic, teaching in a university, and so she does share quite a bit about kind of her teaching and her thinking about the relationships between Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous sciences, and botany, essentially, in the kind of academic context as she learned it. And there's there's a lot of tensions there, but also, different ways of knowing that can be brought together in ways that are, not always the way that they are brought together, but in ways that could be, I think very, very fruitful. And she talks a lot about that. So this is a book that I would recommend if you're interested. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I thought it was excellent. So then I read 3 books for the Literary Witches Project, hosted by Kelly Bear and Becca, which again I'll link below. And the reason I've read 3 for this book club at the time of this update is because I already read April's book. I finished it very much in the early part of the month. It captivated me immediately. I totally fell in love. And since the last update, I also read the February book and the March book. So in Literary Witches, I've read every single book picked so far. So the first of the 3 that was the February book for Literary Witches was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I mentioned this book in my last update. I had actually read this before. Octavia Butler is one of my favorite, Ursula LeGuin as well, but Octavia Butler is one of my absolute all-time favorite authors of fiction, of any sort. And it had been like a lot of time though since I had read this book, and it's a difficult one. The plot, and I'm not giving anything away because with this book you do get really like thrown into the plot immediately. A contemporary African-American woman living in the 1970s is mysteriously, and it's not explained how this happens, but is sucked back in time to the antebellum South, to a plantation that is run with slave labor, and she is having to survive in this context. And so it's a very difficult read. I think it's an incredible book. I'm glad, I was glad to read it again. And I wasn't able to make it to the discussion, the live chat about this book, but I shared my, my thoughts. And I think that this book has a lot to say about, small acts of resistance in the face of oppression, and, also about just the experience. And Octavia Butler, she talks about, and something that's good about this book, actually, I'm like drifting off, like I could say so much about this book. Something that is great about this book, it does include a critical essay at the back, and a reader's guide and some discussion questions. And there is a prologue and a bit of an introduction. And Octavia Butler read and was influenced by slave narratives, so narratives written by former slaves in the United States, and took those up as an influence here. And in a lot of ways, really, like, the time travel element to me is like, it's a device to set up the story, but it's not a book about time travel per se, right? It's a very powerful book, incredidible. And I was happy to, I'm always like into book clubs because I get to discover new books that I haven't read yet. But when this was picked, I was like, it was not even a decision. Like, of course I'll read it again. Such an incredible work. Then we read Half a Lifelong Romance by Eileen Chang. And Eileen Chang I had never read before. I had never even heard of this book, actually. And it is it's a romance of sorts, what the book title suggests, but it follows, a few main characters and the kinds of obstacles that get put in their way, in terms of them wanting a life together. And there's a lot about, tensions between younger and older generations and the power of tradition versus novelty and doing things differently than the prior generations did. It's set in Shanghai in the 1930s, so it is period. It was it didn't quite grab me at first, if I'm completely honest, but then it did. It kind of punched me, if anything. And then I just couldn't stop, and I finished it, and I'm really glad, and grateful to Kelly and Becca and Literary Witches to bring me this book that I probably never would have found otherwise. It's not, historical fiction is not a genre that I generally read. It's a classic novel, but it's probably not one that I ever would have encountered. And I'm glad that we did. So that was Half a Lifelong Romance by Eileen Chang. And then the third book, which I read most recently for Literary Witches, which I don't have to show you because I read it on my Kindle. There's my Kindle in there. Was another book that had been on my want to read list, my long list for a very long time. That is Beloved by Toni Morrison. And Beloved is a book that won the Pulitzer Prize. I can absolutely see why. This book was very deeply affecting. It's a hard book to sum up. It's very kind of atmospheric, and the characters are very multifaceted and complex, but it focuses on a family and characters who have escaped and are former slaves, or a woman who's a former slave. And there are a lot of themes of kind of memory and forgetting and being haunted, literally and figuratively, by the past. I'm trying to speak in a way that, I don't want to spoiler it. If it's a book that is something that's on your list that you're interested in reading. It was a difficult read. It was, but it was so captivating, and I couldn't put it down, and I read it, over a number of days. And I'm really glad, again, for Literary Witches, because, I'm sure I would have read Beloved eventually, but who knows when. So it was a kind of, kind of like Blossom Book Club was for Braiding Sweetgrass. It was kind of the extra impetus that I needed to read a book that I had wanted to read for quite a long time. So I was happy to read Beloved, and I really want to read more of Toni Morrison's work after reading Beloved. Even aside from kind of the story and the characters, and all of the emotions that brought up, Toni Morrison, just in Beloved, there were so many times where I was just like in awe of the sentences that she wrote, like the beauty of her use of language. It's hard to explain, but I think that you will understand what I mean. And other folks, if anybody's reading any of these books in the book club, maybe you've had similar experience to me, or maybe not. We'll see when we discuss the books. So that was my reading group, my 4 reading group books. Other than those, I did read 2 more ebooks from my ebook folder of shame. So I don't have those to show you, but I think I'll list all of these books in the description box so that if you're curious about them, you can look them up. The first book that I read on my vacation in February, which was The Iron Council by China Miéville. And The Iron Council is the 3rd book in a series by China Miéville. The first is Perdido Street Station, and the second is The Scar. The Scar is like one of the best books I've read in the last 5 years. I can't stop thinking about The Scar. But The Iron Council was really great too. Different, quite a genre mishmash. I feel like it is a fantasy horror Western adventure, political. It was a lot of things. It's quite a long novel. It pretty much took the entire vacation to read. But I'm a huge China Miéville fan. I want to read all of his novels. So I was happy to read The Iron Council, and that in the series of books, the Baslag books, which take place in the same universe or in the same geography, The Iron Council is the last one. He has said, I think, that there may be more, so I don't want to call it a trilogy, but for now there are the 3 novels and I've read all of them. The other ebook that I just finished, actually, which I started, I didn't realize how short it was. That's actually a novella and not a novel, was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. And it's about astronauts who are on a kind of exploratory mission, and they go to several different planets. And I won't give away more than that. It's a good read. It's like 160 pages or something like that. It's like a couple of hours read. And I really like Becky Chambers' work a lot. So I was happy to read that one. And I will also say, I've noticed in trying to choose fiction lately to read, in this global pandemic situation that we're in, where I've been reading a lot because I'm at home a lot, I have realized how much of the fiction that I read and that I love is difficult, apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, often fairly violent, difficult, and I was looking for a more uplifting, less emotionally intense and fraught read. And To Be Taught If Fortunate and Becky Chambers' work in general is that for me. It is by no means like, just kind of happy all the way through. It's by no means fluffy, but it's not, immensely emotionally demanding like some of the other fiction that I go for. So I really enjoyed To Be Taught If Fortunate. I just finished it. So that was really great. I haven't started my next fiction read yet, but it will be a book of retellings of myths called The Mythic Dream that is on my pile that I received for Christmas. So that's going to be next. Finally, the last book I broke the rules for. I bought a book without finishing my book pile. I still have quite a few books on my book pile, in fact. There's 5 books out of the 10 that I haven't finished yet. One of them is an in progress, and that's my Lenormand handbook that's going to take like a long, long time. But I still have 4 books on my pile other than that. But I still bought a book. But I'm really excited about it, so, And the book that I bought was for both me and my partner to read. My partner hasn't been reading a lot, was an avid reader at one point, but, not so much in the last years. And I thought that it would be nice, when we figured out that we were both interested in this book, to have it because we could both read it and talk about it, which we did. And it was also my first ever full read of a graphic novel. So that was a new reading experience for me. And the book that we got is They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. And I'm sure that everyone knows George Takei, but in case you don't know who George Takei is, he is an awesome actor and activist. He played Sulu on the original Star Trek series, and in Star Trek the animated series, the voice as well. He has been, an amazing activist, doing all kinds of great work around a number of issues. And this book, They Called Us Enemy, is about the internment camps that Japanese American folks were imprisoned in during World War II. And as a young child, George Takei and his family were interned at a few of those camps, actually, over a number of years. Him and his siblings and his parents. And so this is a graphic telling of that story. I learned a lot about that history that I didn't know. The extent, like in terms of like numbers of people and years of time, is horrifying. And it's framed in this kind of way of contemporary George Takei sharing his story, and giving TED Talks about it, which he has, and why it's important to talk about these stories and to commemorate, these stories and know what has happened. And I'm not sure, honestly, that I'm going to become an avid graphic novel fan. It was weird to be turning the pages so quickly, it's, because there's only so many words on each page. But I really enjoyed this. I'm really glad that we read it. Totally worth cheating on the depth here for. And I already actually have another graphic novel or two that I'm interested in seeking out, and a good friend of mine has quite the collection, and she has a few that she's going to lend me as well, because like loaned books are not cheating. So I'm glad that I read George Takei, They Called Us Enemy, even though it meant breaking the rules a little bit. Well, a lot. I cheated and bought a book, but I'm fine with that. So I consider myself to still be on the depth here, even though I broke one of my rules. So coming up right now, in terms of what I'm reading right now, I'm reading Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler, which I've mentioned before, and I've been reading kind of over a long period of time, but I should be finished that soon, so I'll have more to say on that in my next update. We are reading How to Do Nothing by Odell in the Blossom Book Club. I've only read the first chapter. I'll have more to say on that in my next update. I continue to work through the Complete Lenormand Oracle Handbook by Kathleen Matthews, which I'll have perhaps a review or more on my Lenormand learning later, but honestly, I haven't been in the headspace for that kind of intensive study lately. I've been more enjoying just reading fiction and other kinds of books, so it's hard to focus, So that's where I'm at with my reading. I'm keen to hear what you all are reading as well, of course. Are you reading a lot right now? Is it hard to focus? And maybe you're not reading a lot right now. It seems like in discussions I've had with friends that, some folks are finding themselves reading, intensively and a lot right now. And others are finding themselves, reading less because there's more to worry about right now, right? And there's no, right or wrong way to be dealing with that. And reading could be a great, help in these times, or it's just like a thing that we don't always have time for, and that both of those things are totally fine. So if you've read any great books in the last little while, let me know. I always like reading suggestions, even though I'm going to try to behave myself and not buy another book and not cheat again, at least for a little while. So that's my update. 9 books in just about 2 months. I'm not sure when my next book update will be. We'll see. Trying to keep these under half an hour, so doing them frequently enough that I don't have too many books to talk about. But here we are at 29 minutes. So I've just done that. Okay, I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've stuck with me to the very end of this ramble, that's very kind of you. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you all soon. Have a great day. Be well. Bye.